The All Progressives Congress is reaffirming its support for new amendments in the Electoral Act. The party says the amendment will improve the transparency and credibility of Nigeria's electioneering processes and internal democracy. It's asking Nigerians to ignore the main opposition People's Democratic Party, that's the PDP, and commend the National Assembly for what it calls constitutional innovations in the amendment of the Electoral Act. The party claims direct primaries will enshrine internal party democracy and allow votes count in their elections.
All right, to discuss these concerns, we're now joined by Executive Director of Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center, Auwal Rafsanjani, and a constitutional lawyer, Festus Oguche. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on Newsnight tonight. Let's begin with what INEC is coming up with, or has just said that it can only do so, that's carry out direct primaries, when the president signs the Electoral Act Amendment Bill into law. What's your reading of that, in spite of the fact that everybody seems to be saying this is exactly what we want, this is what will deepen Nigeria's democracy? Rafsanjani?
Thank you very much. For us in civil society, and particularly Transition Monitoring Group, which I chair, I think it is important that whatever method we will do to carry out our elections, processes that can give confidence to Nigerians, processes that can also eliminate, deviousness, manipulation, and using all sort of tendency like violence, money, and other intimidation to undermine the credibility and the fairness of election. So as far as we are concerned, it is absolutely necessary, if INEC is going to have the full power to carry out this exercise, it has the full mandate of the law, which is to say that the president has to assent to this to avoid possibility of some people going to court to undermine and caution the credibility of the use of the electronic voting, electronic transmission. So I think INEC is absolutely right and correct. If we really want to do this seriously, the president simply has to assent to this. I don't think he should have objection if he claims or if he believes in the transparent and accountable election in the country. It has been long overdue that Nigerians are looking for a way in which our election can be improved from the kind of fraudulent processes that we have seen people imagine, even from the party primaries up to the general election. So as far as TMG is concerned, TMG is fully in support of INEC on this issue.
All right, thank you so much, Rafsanjani. Let me come to you, Festus. What's your position on the amendment by the Senate for parties to adopt direct primaries?
Yes, that's a very straightforward question, and I think it's a move in the right direction that at least we have the National Assembly, particularly the Senate, committing itself to ensuring that we have an electoral system that can stand the test of time, that will meet in every sense of credibility and sanctity. They are there to make laws. Their capacity to make laws is properly enshrined in the Constitution, and in doing so, a lot of variables come into play. But I would say that the idea of having the National Assembly make laws to determine the internal working mechanism of a political party is out of it, totally, completely out of it. I would rather say that even the Electoral Act cannot do that per se. There are different layers of law, the paramount being the Constitution, which is the alter ego, omnes ego, and followed by other legislations down up to subsidiary legislations, up till the bylaws enacted by the local government councils. And within those layers, there are things that should not be there. I believe the Constitution mandates that political parties should exist, and they exist for the purposes of conduct of elections and to meet the aspirations of people who want to participate in those elections, either directly or indirectly, and be voted and votes for others. But along the line, I think once the Constitution states very clearly that political parties should exist, then those parties must be structured on a particular mode of operation, mode of administration, mode of doing things. I think the issue of whether a political party should adopt the direct or indirect primary is something that is purely within the internal mechanism of the political party itself. They have their constitution, and it cannot be imposed by the National Assembly. Probably the Senate had meant well in going ahead to do what it did, but I believe that anything that is worth doing well. To the extent that I understand, if a law of that nature is to be made, there must be a wide consultation with the political parties to know the extent to which they can conform with a particular mode of conduct of primary, and not necessarily for the Senate to sit aloof and think that maybe he can make that law and then force it on the political parties now.
Well, Festus has just raised a fundamental question there as to whether, with all the good intentions that the Senate may have, is it within its purview to come up with this law, that all parties should deploy the mode of direct primaries? But maybe you want to address that, and also what are the pros and cons? What do you see for this direct primaries? What do you see down the line, especially as we move towards 2023?
Yeah, well, okay, first and foremost, ideally there should be a wide consultation, like you rightly mentioned, with the political parties and other stakeholders before arriving at this law, as good as it is, because honestly, many Nigerians have been eliminated from contesting election, even from the party primaries to the general election, because of the way and manner in which manipulation of the processes has been happening in various political parties, not only the ruling party but all the other political parties. So ideally, in an ideal democratic environment, you should really allow people to directly vote their own choice, and that will help with issues of issue-based in campaign. Candidates will be compelled to do campaign based on issues, not based on how much money you have actually bribed people or you have bribed the party official. And imposition of a candidate also, this will also help to eliminate that. But like I said, it would have been nice if the National Assembly have consultation, and more of like negotiation with the political parties to arrive at this, if at all we must legislate on this. But definitely there are advantages of having direct, party primaries. Of course, one of the disadvantages is, you have so many other smaller parties, and given the size of the country, how are you going to be able to conduct a free, fair, and satisfactory party primaries? Secondly, because of the cost involved, it might also be difficult for some other political parties. The ruling party and maybe one or two opposition political parties that may afford to do that because they have structures, they have also resources. But if we are going to look at other political parties, it might be difficult for them to meet up with that. And I think it is important that we all look at both sides. I think the general popular opinion of Nigerians, they want to direct party primaries. There are some challenges with that, but I think given the fact that if we really want to allow democracy to fly in this country, if we really want to allow the party members to have ownership on who's representing them or who eventually emerge as a candidate, I think we need to have direct party primaries, but not necessarily imposition through the law, like the National Assembly have done. They should have done consultation to ensure that political parties are in agreement with them.
All right, Auwal, thank you. Well, I don't know. It's already done. Festus, I'm going to ask you two questions. But you might not have time to answer all of it, so we'll probably get back and then you answer two of them. One, the point you raised. The law has been passed, until the president signs it, now that it goes ahead. So what happens now? That's one. And then where does this leave our democracy in terms of inclusivity and improvement in our election process and internal democracy? Those two questions, Festus.
Yes, thank you very much. They are very apt questions. Your question number one is very straightforward also. And I think it cannot come into effect unless the president endorses on it. That's the mood of legislative procedure that we have adopted. I think that's the same thing with the US style. Though I will think that some of these areas of electoral reform are not necessarily matters of legislation, because if you look at the Constitution mandates INEC to make regulations for the conduct of elections. So issues like whether electronic method or means could be used in transmitting elections should be a matter that can be determined by INEC. The other time the Senate was conducting a hearing, and some gentlemen from the National Communications Commission came on board and told the whole world that the prospects of having electronic elections, electronic transmission of results is not possible in Nigeria. Barely 24 hours later, INEC was up in arms and said, no, we have the capacity to transmit election results from polling units across the country. So INEC is the umpire, the one that conducts the election. It understands itself. It knows the nitty-gritty of what it's supposed to do. Some of these regulations are things that should form under the regulatory procedures of conduct of elections. But then, you won't blame the National Assembly because the judiciary itself, particularly the Supreme Court, they don't help matters to the extent
from Festus. But anyway, Festus, hang in there, and a while we'll be back to two of you, and we'll continue these discussions. Don't go away. All right, glad to have you back. We still have Auwal Rafsanjani, Executive Director, Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center, here with us, of course, Festus Oguche. He's a lawyer. So, Festus, we're still sticking with you.
Yes.
You know, you kind of didn't particularly hit the nail on the head in the first question. That is, if the president signs it, it becomes law. What happens? That's the first one. And the second one is, where does this leave our democracy in terms of inclusivity and improvement in our electoral process, and then, of course, internal democracy?
Yes, like I was saying, the process of legislative making is that the president must assent to it and give his approval. If he refuses, it takes it back to the National Assembly. Both houses can sit and adopt it, and it becomes law. But it first of all has to have the force of law. That is how it's supposed to be. But then I am saying that some of these matters that go to the National Assembly in the name of electoral reforms are not even matters of legislation. I am also saying that the Constitution had given the INEC mandates to do certain things, to even make subsidiary law, and even put together certain processes for the primary purpose of conducting free, fair, credible elections. And so if you want to include anything, or include a device that will ensure credibility and sanctity of the polls, you don't have to go to the National Assembly. INEC can on its own do it. You know, at the last time this matter came up, the National Assembly brought in some gentlemen from the National Communications Commission, and they told the whole world that, look, we are not ripe yet for electronic transmission of votes. Less than 24 hours, INEC was up in arms and said, look, we have the capacity to deliver, to transmit elections across polls in this country anytime, any day. So INEC is the one conducting the elections. They are the ones that understand it. But then you will not really blame the National Assembly here, because the judicial interpretation of what's going on in terms of post-election disputes tend to suggest that everything that INEC will use or engage in the electoral process must be provided under law. You see, consider how the Supreme Court dealt with the matter of card reader in Wiki against this other case. You know, so these are not, it doesn't necessarily have to include data collection and all that. After all, electronic materials are part of the Evidence Act. If INEC feels that a particular material is important or is imperative for the conduct of free, fair, credible polls, it has the power to do it without necessarily having it put into law. That is for your question number one. Number two, I think the move that's been made right now is quite commendable. We thought at the initial stage when the Senate and the House of Representatives were debating on the issue of electronic transmission of votes and all that, that probably they don't want to they are very wary or reluctant to effect electoral reforms. But the reforms have started. We embrace it very, very well. It makes for full participation of the people in their government. That's the whole essence of democracy. For indirect or indirect electoral processes, primary elections, I'm not saying that one is good or the other is bad. They are all good. They are all bad. They have their good sides and they have their bad sides. For the direct elections, of course, we all know what had happened during the PDP days and how they clearly brought out some persons they call statutory delegates who are members of the National Assembly, people who are in official positions. And that to me is circumventing the democratic process. For indirect elections, we all know how delegates are being bribed and a whole lot of intrigues go on, each time these elections are conducted, and particularly when the manipulative process of the political elites come into bear. What is important is to entrench a system that can stand the test of time, that can meet the standards of global trends in elections, and I think that's where the key is.
Well, before we wrap very quickly, would that lead then to the question of how independent really is INEC? If it has to, recourse to the National Assembly with this move now, whether it's on direct or indirect primaries or other issues that affect the electoral process that the National Assembly may come up with. How independent should the INEC be? And then this now, how does this affect political parties in terms of their constitution? Because if indeed they have to go the way of direct primaries, they all have to do that. How is that going to play out before 2023?
Well, I think for me, this is something that can be considered, to have multi-stakeholders conversation, discussion. The whole essence of lawmaking, it has to do with the public participation. You can't just sit down and legislate laws for political parties without consulting them, without reaching consensus among the political parties and also the other stakeholders. So I think, I see a situation whereby maybe perhaps this, issue will still come back because just like the Senate opposed the, electronic transmission, and after the public pressure, they have to now come back and agree with what Nigerians are saying. So in this case, if the popular views by Nigerians is that you have to consult the political parties and get their consensus, their buy-in in it before you go into this, then definitely this will come back. Then again, in terms of how this will affect the independence of INEC, of course, INEC will definitely be affected if it has this kind of law and some people go to court. If INEC conducts election, with this, some people can go and, argue in the court that this is illegal. I mean, this is contradicting the Constitution. So I think, it is important that INEC do what they are doing now by getting the attention of the president before anybody else to assent to it, so that they know that they don't have contention. They don't have anybody going to disrupt, and undermine the election. So it is important that we build a consensus, on this issue, because we are doing the law for the country and not for just, some few individuals.
Exactly. Auwal Rafsanjani, Executive Director, Civil Society Legislative Advocacy Center. Thank you so much. And Festus Oguche, thank you, gentlemen, for being on Newsnight.